Thank you so much for coming along today. Today's topic is one that is really important as we think about active bystander mentality and approaches in sport, because it's thinking around inclusion and, more importantly, how we have more equitable practice in sport, and we think about diversity and what that means for enhancing the game and enhancing safety and fun. So we're going to look at quite a few areas of equity. We're going to think about actually what the terms mean. We're going to think about examples in both elite sport but also in grassroots inclusion, have a bit of a discussion around why it's important, and then thinking about actually some of those wider things that people don't always think about, such as health outcomes, because often that's missed when we talk about inclusion. People just think it's about enhancing the sport. We also miss the benefits we get for individuals. And then we'll talk about some of the key services and some guidance and support for after this session today. We always have to think about our safety when we're talking about active bystander, but especially if we're talking about equity and inclusion, because we know that a big part of talking about equity goes hand in hand with discrimination and marginalisation. So by all means today, it's really important to protect your energy. If you're watching this as a recording after today's session, even more so, and you'll obviously have our details to reach out to us if anything that comes up today is something you want to have further support for. We have to be mindful that anyone who attends these sessions, we don't know exactly what everyone's experiences are. We can't make presumptions on people's diversity, so we have to be mindful of protecting each other in this space as well. So something I asked for in a session today, and we're going to have some discussion at the end, is about accountability and making sure that we are talking to each other with accountability, that if we do get something wrong or we use a term that perhaps is maybe not appropriate in today's society, that if we do need to raise that with each other, we do it with compassion. And we also accept if we do get that wrong, that's okay. We're all here to learn, we're here to grow, and to make sure that we keep moving forward in this process. Naturally, this is a really short session today, so we can't cover every barrier. We know there's going to be so many topics we are not going to cover. This is a topic we could talk about for such a long time and in so many different lenses. So what we want to be mindful of, again, is time sensitivity doesn't mean those barriers aren't important. And we know that lots of people, when we talk about equitable engagement in sport, are going to have different experiences. And that intersectionality really comes into that, which is all those different elements of who we are and how we identify. But also it means there's multiple layers for some people in that discrimination and marginalisation. And then again, will impact potentially how we interact with today's session. So compassion first, above anything. If you do need to step out, feel free to. If you want to re-engage in the session, of course, you can come back in. But just be mindful that your protection is really important in this space. And as we're saying about checking language or challenging, you also have full permission to challenge anybody who's presenting today. If you're not happy with anything, please raise it. You can put things in the chat, or when we have our Q&A at the end, we can, of course, unpack that as well. And what we want to do today is think really consciously about what is the purpose of this topic. Why are we talking about inclusion and equitable practice when it comes to active bystander mentality? How do they relate to each other? And ultimately, what are we seeking? So I have got some colleagues here with me today, but I thought I would just explain a bit about why we're having this week. And it's ultimately around improving culture in sport. My name's Emma Swan, and I'm a sport welfare officer at Active Suffolk. And part of the Sport Welfare Officer Network is focused on inclusive culture. It's primarily focused on safeguarding and welfare, but naturally inclusive culture is a big part of that. And I have a fellow sport welfare officer with me today who's going to share some of her thoughts and experiences. And I've also got a colleague here for NWG who I'll let them introduce themselves in a moment, who is going to also share their experiences and why this topic matters to them as well. With that being said, no one here is expected to share personal experiences. We can talk about our professional experiences or thoughts and reflections, but I'm not going to force anybody to talk about something they're not comfortable with today. So if I can just pass over first of all to Vicky, because you're first on my screen, if you could just introduce yourself, please, and then we'll go to Sukhdev after.
Thanks, Emma. So I'm Vicky Merrick. I'm the Sport Welfare Officer, so I do the same role as Emma, but in Northamptonshire. So I cover the County of Northamptonshire for the Active Partnership Northamptonshire Sport. Emma and myself have a lot of conversations about EDI and what that looks like within our roles. It's something I'm exceptionally passionate about. My background is in education. I've taught internationally for 6 years, and being in those diverse spaces and being a former PE teacher as well, I really appreciate the need to push for inclusivity, because if we want everyone to be physically active, if we want everyone to benefit from sport and physical activity, then we need to think about the people in front of us and how we're going to make sure they have safe spaces. So that's kind of the conversation Emma and I have had to get to this point, and it's why I think you've invited me along today to chat with you about it. So looking forward to doing that in a little while.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Vicky. And yeah, it's definitely a conversation we've had a lot, and we're probably not going to stop having either. So I really appreciate that. And Vicky's been super insightful for me to speak with as well, because it's helped me understand and be able to support clubs better as well. So again, the value of our learning journey is so important. So thank you. And then Sukhdev, if I can come to yourself, please.
Thanks so much. So I'm Sukhdev. I'm the EDI lead at the NWG. My background in youth and community work, but I've also worked in child exploitation teams in Hampshire. And my role with the NWG, like I said, is an EDI role, but that looking at that equality, diversity, inclusion through that lens in terms of safeguarding and especially child exploitation. And obviously, when it comes to sport, inclusiveness is a must in terms of trying to get communities to work together and getting groups to kind of come together and using sport as a vehicle for that community kind of cohesion as well. But
yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I think community is something we miss, isn't it? As we talk again about sport and performance all the time, we think about this really elite element of sport, but actually so much of sport is just human connectedness. So I think it's really lovely that that is the lens you're kind of thinking about as we start this conversation today. And I think it's a really nice way actually to move straight into this slide here, because I know this is one we've spoken about away from this session, is when we actually think about language change over time. This is a prime example, as we used to focus a lot on equality. And what that meant is, I think, probably aiming for that level playing field, to no pun intended there, but thinking about access and space in sport. But actually, equality denies the truth of the reality. And I think this visual really nicely shows what we're really actually aiming to do. And I think, we look at, say, trauma-informed language, and we look at things like anti-racist journeys, and we always talk about journey, not destination, because we're constantly evolving, our knowledge will change. But what we're really seeking is actually just that free access where anybody is welcome, wanted, feels included, seen. And that kind of liberation piece is really lovely here, because we cannot deny that not everybody gets to start from the same point. So before we move on further, I just wanted to put it out actually to yourselves, Vicky and Sukhdev. Is there anything you want to explain about why this visual might resonate with you, or what you think is important in this conversation?
Yeah, I don't mind going on that one. So I've seen so many iterations of this image, and I really like it as a visual. And I remember at first only seeing the middle two images, the equality and equity. But then you still think, well, there's still something wrong because the barrier is still there. Yeah. And actually, it's only when we move from kind of EDI in its early, what that looked like. Let's talk about, before we even got to equity, let's talk about equality, diversity, inclusion. And then we brought justice in, and then we bring belonging in. And that's when we only start to say, actually, these barriers that exist for people, how are we getting rid of those barriers? What are we doing as people in these positions of power, essentially, to help get everybody involved and completely remove the barriers, as well as providing them with the support they need, not just, give everyone the same support. So I love that the image that I used to see like 5 years ago has now become this image, because feels a lot more realistic, I think.
Absolutely. And just on that, I know we discussed this, Emma, didn't we, in terms of this diagram, and I like this version of it because, like it, it's been said that barrier is being removed, and I think we need to think of barriers as systems as well.
Yes.
In terms of how do we overcome those systems and remove some of those obstacles in the systems for there to be equity and liberation as well. So yeah, absolutely brilliant.
Absolutely. And I think the word system there is really important, especially as active partnerships. We are system partners. That's kind of where we sit. We're there to do as much positive change in sport as we can, and equal that opportunity for people to access physical activity. And I think we speak often about physical activity, not just sport, because as we'll talk about probably a little bit later, there's health benefits mentally, physically and socially to being involved in physical activity that's not just always focused on performance and output, but the system and the infrastructure is often the biggest barrier, because we have lots of people that care about equity and inclusion, but actually sometimes the system is part of that challenge. So I think these are really important points that we've started with already. And I just wanted to put up a few different definitions, because I think when we talk about inclusion, it needs to be coexisting with the concept of welfare and well-being, because we need to understand they're not separate. If we're looking at safeguarding and welfare culture, inclusion is a huge part of that. And if we're thinking about, well, how does active bystander mentality come in with that? It's because if we actually look at inclusive practice, it's being proactive. And that's really the essence of being an active bystander, is it's proactive thinking and behaviours, even if it's not direct in the moment. So if we're thinking about inclusive approaches, we have to always think of them as directly related to people's welfare and well-being in sport, because they have to feel exactly that word, Vicky, like they belong. Because it's not just can they attend, it's are they wanted? Do they feel that they're going to be welcomed and treated with that same hope and fun and praise and all those other elements that we get when we have that new sporting experience. But we also have to be really mindful that the reality is this isn't just about all the nice positive elements. It's the realistic fact that lots of people face discrimination in sport, and that's before they even get to sport or physical activity. They face it even if they talk about wanting to do it. So we need to think about, the reality is they go hand in hand. We need welfare, inclusion, equity and discrimination to be spoken about together, because we know that ultimately inclusive approaches benefit everybody. So diversity is a natural part of our society. People often think diversity is something we've almost created, but it's just the natural human experiences to be different. Even just at a genetic level, we're all completely different. We don't have the same DNA. So we need to think really holistically about these approaches. And I think even in something where we look at, say, neurodiversity, this is something that's growing quite a lot in the conversations in inclusive spaces in sport, because it hasn't always been spoken about. And we can't see neurodiversity. So sometimes people think diversity is just the things we see, but actually it's not. It's life experiences. It's how we kind of experience and connect with the world around us as well. So we need to think about why it's important. And I've just said as well, it's inclusive practice benefits everyone. It's not that it just benefits the people who are being marginalised. I think, Vicky, you shared a really wonderful quote with me that actually we know certain groups are more disadvantaged naturally, women, marginalised ethnic groups, if we think about people who are living with disabilities or chronic illness. So we're having barriers to sport all the time. So why is inclusion important to yourselves? Why do you think it matters in this space for us to talk about inclusion and talk about it in Active Bystander Week?
I mean, for me, it's that it's just being wanting to be included. As simple as that. Wanting to have that space to say, yeah, I can go there and I'll be included. I can take part and I can do what I want to do, rather than being forced to or not being able to do what I want to do. It's for me, it's that quite simple. It's having that opportunity to be able to do it, and having that choice.
I think a key word which is underused, I think, with regard to communities and sport, is that word belonging. And I think we need to have that EDI and then the B on the end of it as belonging. Well, I actually belong to something, but actually I belong to something because people want me here, and actually I've got no barriers to going anywhere. I can participate, I can watch, or just be around me. I remember my football experience. I was never a good footballer. But I used to like just being part of it. I would be the sub, the forever sub, or I'd run the line. And for me, I was absolutely happy with that, because I realised I'm not going to be out there much, but I just wanted to be part of it. And the club said, yeah, absolutely, Kev, every now and again I got a game when we were playing the poorer teams. And I was absolutely happy with that. But it's the way they fostered that sense of belonging. And I think that's what we really need to do, get people to really let's get that belonging going. You belong to the whole organisation, not just part of the elite team.
Yeah.
You're part of everything.
Yeah, and I think it goes into a really nice conversation I actually had yesterday with someone, which was around, we only seem to champion the person who's getting that gold medal or getting that specific goal or that result. And we actually forget that even behind the scenes, within any club of any sport, there's a whole infrastructure of people that are actually part of that success. And I was actually listening to a podcast this morning with Ollie Watkins, and he was talking about, actually, for me to achieve, there's all these people behind the scenes that help that happen, even if it's down to like those who are doing the physiotherapy behind the scenes. Actually, we only get to perform at the level we are because of everybody else in the system. And if we think about that club culture conversation we had yesterday, it's that Ubuntu mindset again. I am because we are. If I am okay because I'm looking around me and I'm making sure everyone feels okay, then it's that natural benefit we get from that. And I think that belonging word is quite a new word to me in the inclusion space. It's actually Vicky, you brought this to me, isn't it, when we first started speaking about EDI and that extension of those letters, because actually we do miss that enjoyment piece. And I think, Vicky, we've spoken about this quite a lot, haven't we, is the enjoyment in belonging.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting coming from an education background in that, especially in the international space, a lot of schools now are moving away from having kind of an EDI coordinator, and there's a great school that calls it a Jedi. so it's justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, or like Jedi B and put the belonging on the end.
I like that.
So that I nearly applied for that role actually, just so I could say I was a Jedi finally. But I think, yeah, it's so important, the belonging, because I think in sport, and similar to what Kev was just saying, growing up in sport, and I've played at an okay level in a couple of sports, but nothing incredible. But community has always been the key driver for me. And actually, if I can turn up, and I still attempt to play rugby now, even though I probably shouldn't, but if I can turn up and feel like they're my people, that's my group. And actually, I think the really important part that you've got on the slide there is that inclusive practices benefit everyone. You know, the coach's use of language, putting on activities that everyone can take part in, it's benefiting the whole group, but actually those people that might otherwise have felt like this isn't a space for me suddenly feel like, oh, actually, no, this is a space for me. I can come here. I am welcome here. So I think, you know, the belonging fits in with the community, and it fits in like, let's make those spaces as open as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's something, if we look at, say, human needs, we know that community is a big part of that. We need connectedness. Even if it's just one positive relationship, that gives us so much resilience to other life experiences. And, you know, I've always grown up around football. There's something really powerful about when you see someone in the same shirt as you instantly just feel something, even though you don't know that person, you actually know nothing about them. If you can recognize we share something, we share a passion, it's an instant anchor of just like, oh, okay, I'd have something to talk about with them. It's if we go into a new room and you see people, you start to group based on preferences of, say, music or art or sport preferences. And there are all these things that just help people connect. And I think that value is so important for people because it becomes part of who we are and it shapes us. And we learn really good values by being in part of sport. So I think we miss often that joy part, and that expression as well is that sport is a form of art for lots of people. It's how they express. If you think of a footballer practicing a new trick, or that gymnast, you know, if we look at Simone Biles, tell me that's not art, you know. So if we actually look at what we gain by making sure that anybody everywhere can access sport, we get to then get our role models and see other people try new tricks, and we get that really artistic element of ourselves coming through. But there's also just a health benefit, is if we are actually deciding that people have the power to stop people engaging in physical activity and sport, we're preventing their health benefits. We're looking at, you know, the holistic lens here, the World Health Organization, that looks at not just, you know, absence of illness, but actually that mental health. If we look at the social gains, health is really holistic. So if we think of physical activity as being a stress reliever, it might therefore mean we are potentially going to be more likely to keep a job. It might mean we're going to have better friendships. There's somebody recently I was listening to suggesting, I think it's Simon Sinek, that there's been studies on people and friendships and actually to do with our quad health. So the stronger our quads are, because we have better access to movement, which means we can make more relationships, we can get to more spaces. So there's so many interconnected parts of inclusion benefiting health. And it's even that space of just actually learning that there is spaces where you can go and we feel safe. If we think of a lot of young people, their sporting location might be the only place they're safe. It might be that actually they don't feel safe at school because maybe there's a bully, or maybe they don't have a big friendship group, and they go to sport and it's that one thing. Like when I was at school, and you know, school was okay, but I loved sport. But knowing I could go to football and go training and go at the weekend was the motivator for my entire week. And it was so exciting. And I had these friends who just got it because they loved football as well. And you get so much peace of mind and safety if you are in a club that supports that welcoming, inclusive environment. And also you get a chance to achieve. And that's a really important human experience as well, is that ability to try something new. You don't all have to be Ronaldo at football. We don't always have to be Simone Biles, or, you know, all those different people that are at the very top 1% of their sport. It's just, can I try something new and be good at it? Can I have fun doing that? Can I be curious? And we need to make sure that everybody has the chance to do lots of different things in sport, because excelling really comes from being safe first. So I wanted to really now explore was, how does being active bystanders relate to this? So if we think about a bystander being someone who isn't active, you know, there's someone who's quite passive in this space, but the active bystander being someone that sees injustice or sees inappropriate or threatening behaviour and does something about it. What do we think about how this comes into inclusive practice? How is being an active bystander relevant in sport and inclusion?
I'll have a go at this one. I think using kind of a personal anecdote, I think language is massive. And again, in the world of sport. So for myself as a rugby player, that lad culture still exists and it's still there, and the language that's used. And I'm really lucky that I live at a point where I've seen the development of the women and the girls game over the last 20 years, and I'm astounded by it. But I'm still like, we have so far to go still, because actually the language I hear at my own rugby club on a weekly basis sometimes diminishes, and it can be sexist language. And it's about being that person who's willing to make that challenge. And it doesn't have to be, and I know Kev delivers this brilliantly with the bystander intervention training, it doesn't have to be in an aggressive way. It just has to be a raising awareness to it, that actually let's think about the language we use, because we could be unintentionally using language in our own safe little bubble, whether it's a rugby club, a football club, a gymnastics club, a cricket club, but other people hear it and go, oh, this isn't a space for me, because actually they're talking about one of my characteristics here, or a part of my identity, and they're mocking it or they're belittling it, maybe, you know, trying to use banter, and we know we speak about banter as a loaded word, but if someone's willing to stand up and go, hang on a minute, you know, think about what you're saying before you open your mouth, just think about who's around you, and think about, we can preach inclusivity all day, but actually if you're not living that with your language and your actions, then it doesn't mean anything. So I think it's massively language in our sports clubs and our kind of physical activity organizations. Like, is the language we're using showing that we're inclusive and that everyone is invited there into that space?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on there. We've just been down in a rugby club just down in Hertfordshire last week, where they wanted us to talk to a group of 13 to 17-year-olds about that very thing there, Vicky, about their language. And we spoke about the bystander interventions. And then we put up a report from the RFU, which is about the women's role in the game and how women actually feel they're perceived in sport. And you hit the exact nail on all the language, you know, you think if you're demeaning me, you're mocking me. And literally to put this up on the wall and see the kids read it, it says, that's your sport. And it says it's down to you now to be the champions of this game and protect your whole sport, not just the silo of men's games, women's game, the whole sport. And the one of the ladies safeguarding brought us in because they said we have to have it come from somebody different rather than us, because when we talk about, oh, it's there again talking about this again, we came in as a different perspective, non-sporting organisation, and we've really sort of nailed it with them. But it really did sit with the youngsters because we were just appealing direct to them. And I have to say, no, they're really good in giving their, you know, their understanding, but also the experience of what they saw. Because we said this is a really safe space, and they want, because they're friends with these girls, because they go to school with them, they play rugby with them, and they don't want them to see, you know, them leave the sport. And it's really heartening to see, you know, this particular club, it's a big club. They must have about 12 or 13 women and girls teams, and it's quite unique. But it says, even though they've got all these, you know, these teams in, it says we still have work to do. So the fact that they weren't just settling, oh, this is great, we've got these teams, it says we still haven't got that level of equity, diversity and inclusion. And we need to sort of keep stretching that parameters. So it was really interesting that, but like the language is absolutely key. It really is key. And just being aware of not offending body, but the impact that language can have on individuals, on the group you're with, but also on the group you're talking about. There's sort of different dynamics there.
Absolutely. And I think there's a point of when we talk, are we matching it with what we do? And I think it's super easy sometimes to say, we're really inclusive, we're really welcoming. But what are your behaviours behind that? Because if you're a culture, you know, Kev, we spoke about before, this concept of calling someone in rather than just, you know, telling someone off if they use, say, perhaps language that's not appropriate or language that's changed in over time, if we've learned, you know, new, more appropriate, inclusive terminology or language. What we actually have to do is reach and teach with people, is we need to take moments to say gently, are you aware where that word stems from? Do you know what that actually means, you know, out of context? Because when I used to coach football, some of the young players that I was coaching would sometimes use words, and I think, I don't think you know what that truly means.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
the impact it can have, which is why you're using it in a semi-negative way here with your friends, but actually that's reinforcing this stereotype. And so it's a really interesting thing sometimes when people can say, we're an inclusive club. What are you doing to demonstrate? And if I asked you for evidence, can you show me how? And that's not to be, well, show me how then and being aggressive. It's, okay, have you thought about checking with others if they perceive that? And I think this is something we can look at, is what's the authentic narrative about your club? How would other people describe your club? How would they say they feel by being present?
It's that thing, who are you trying to include, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Who are you include, and what do they say about your club or your organisation? I think that's the key.
Yeah, absolutely. And does it feel authentic when it's done? You know, if we think about, say, for example, lots of people have opinions about sports stars taking the knee and making a stand against anti-racism. And it's an extremely important movement, because we know that there is still so much racism in sport. It's happening at a grassroots level. It's still happening at elite levels. You know, only in the last year, we've had footballers coming out, you know, in actually their interviews and saying, I can't do this anymore, and breaking down. We've seen it in other sports stars saying they're experiencing racial profiling still and discrimination. They're being treated differently when they go to venues. So we know it's still there. And I think this culture piece is really important. So there's lots of ways we can really think about truly being inclusive. It's not to say by being inclusive in mindset we've got everything right straight away, and I think that's what scares some people, maybe, is this idea that by tomorrow we need to have everything perfect. And it's actually, no, it's the journey still. It's, where are you? Can you be honest about that? Being accountable to our impact. And I think about this in this kind of thinking, feeling, doing way, is, okay, what are you thinking about? What feelings does that bring up for you? And therefore, what are you going to do about it? And I think culture checking is really important. We need to really help people to understand how to get authentic feedback about their culture, whether that's anonymous surveys. You know, when you go into certain shops and there's just those little smiley faces and a little scale, and you kind of press a button as you leave. And as much as they're really simple tools, actually it makes us prompt that thought of, I wonder what the negative experience was there, or that maybe amber warning light. Was it something to do with inclusive culture? Is it because of our behaviour? Was it another spectator? How can we address that? How are we setting the tone when people come to see us? And this is where that verbals, visuals and vocals comes in, because it's not just what do we say, but it's the tone of how we say it. And what does our demeanour look like as we deliver it? Do we look like we have integrity when we deliver these messages? And do our posters show inclusion? Do we put clear messaging out about codes of conduct and values and our standards? Because if we walk in and we just see posters, but then people are behaving really against that principle, then there's a little bit of a disconnect there that people are going to question it. Whereas if you're then going to think about perhaps your club welfare officers, their work can be active bystander in how they approach codes of conduct and club mentality, because they can use their values and their behaviours and their code of conducts to challenge, you know, those lower level concerns and even other wider risks, because actually we have something to show and say, that's not what we do here. That's not the way we do things. We don't tolerate that here. Did you understand this? And helping people understand that bigger vision, because we need to feel safe. We need to feel safe to achieve, to have good relationships. We need to feel physically safe in our locations. For example, our toilets, open, gendered and shared, is in one big space, because whilst lots of spaces would say that's really proactive, for some people being a mixed gender would be even more vulnerable for them, because if they are identifying perhaps with being non-binary, they might find that toilet selections is a really triggering space for them. They maybe want their own private cubicle, they want to be somewhere separate, but on the other hand, maybe they want to be in an open space. So we can't make presumptions because someone once said something works better. And I've heard lots of different opinions about, say, toilet spacing, or even signage as you walk through about accessibility language. We need to ask people. If someone comes to us and says, I identify with this part of society and I'm experiencing this barrier, it's not then us going, I've got the solution for you. It's, okay, what do you need? How can I help? It's asking for that feedback all the while to make sure that what we're doing is for the best interest of the people in our club. And I was speaking to someone a little while ago, and they were talking about their experiences of somebody coming forward with a barrier they're experiencing at their club. And rather than just making a stereotype response, they took a few meetings with them. They met with them one-to-one away from the club. They spoke to them on different formats, and they had this really big strategy of, how do you want to approach this? And it was really inclusive, it was really wholesome, and it was so intentional to keep that person in that club environment, because that was their idea. It was all about retention. It wasn't, that might not work for this club, it might not work in this team. It was, how can I keep you here? Because you matter as a person, as a human being, you matter to be here. So we need to think about not just retention in the wider club sense. I think, Vicky, you gave a really great example before about retention on a pitch, about having like a squared off space. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, about when people are maybe emotionally dysregulated.
Yeah, and it's something that came about. I was doing a session about it was a training session around neurodiversity in physical education, actually. And it goes back to what you just said, Emma, about we need to ask people what they want. And one of the ideas was use football as an example, having like a squared off space or an area kind of away from the pitch that's just a self-regulation zone. And it was pitched as, oh, this is great for young people who are neurodiverse, because if we can kind of see that they're starting to become slightly overwhelmed by the situation, there's a potential to step in as a coach or as a teacher and go, do you want to come with me? We'll spend 5 minutes over here. There are things to do in that space, but actually it's taking you away from what could be an overwhelming situation. But then you put that back into that wider context of what we were talking about earlier, best practices for everyone. Actually, if you're coaching teenagers and dealing with teenagers, they can all become overwhelmed and they can all become emotional because they are teenagers. So that space isn't just for, people who are neurodiverse can go and use this space. Anyone can use that space. This is a space for you. You know, you can put things like, I've seen like blow up camping chairs been put in them, right? And just like little things like fidget spinners and gadgets and things for people to sit, and anyone can take that and use that space. And it's just about building up that environment so that everyone who's participating knows, if I need the time and can identify, I need that self-regulation time, I need to go over here, take 5-10 minutes, and then I can come back and be an active part of this session again. And then that is for everyone. But it's really interesting that it was initially pitched in this, if you're working with neurodiverse participants, this is really good. Well, that might not work for all neurodiverse participants, because neurodiversity is very, very wide.
Absolutely.
And, we can't go, everybody who has ADHD will really benefit from 5 minutes over here with a fidget spinner. That's not, that's not the case. But actually having that space for anyone to use, regardless of who they are, is a good option to have. So I think things like that, it comes under kind of that adjustments that you've got on the screen now. It's considerations, and they can be quite small things in a coaching space, in a sports space, but actually they can benefit everyone. But everyone just needs to understand that it's coming from a place of safety and a place of making them feel more comfortable. And that's the design behind it.
Absolutely. And I think the really important thing as well is we forget, even just at a trauma level, if someone has PTSD or is experiencing anxiety or panic attacks, is when people are experiencing any level of marginalisation or challenge, often they have to completely leave a space, which means they miss learning objectives. For those players that can go into that self-regulation zone, they get to still watch the demonstrations, which means when they re-enter the session, they know what's going on still. They don't have to then be double identified as left and come back by then, okay, we need to rerun the demo, or someone come over here. They get to slot back in at a time and a space that suits them. And I think that's really important. And if we think about adjustments, we also need to think about, actually, there might be some cultures and communities that require one gender space because of whatever their cultural practices and needs are. So again, it's this asking. When people meet us, they come into our clubs, it might just be no presumptions and not presuming what we think someone is. It's just perhaps a question on their sign-up form which says, do you have any certain needs that we need to be aware of? Is there anything that helps you engage better in sport? Is there something that would be a barrier for you to engage sport? Those questions allow us to shape the best offer that we possibly can. And also even just the levels of what we offer. If your club is really competitive, which is fine because we do love elite sport, that's of course something wonderful. But do you have a silly little kickabout as well? Do you have a fun session where it's just about confidence in the water? Do you have a gymnastics session which is more focused on just supporting people and learning to trust your colleagues that you're working with? There's all these things we think about, that sport is that facilitator for that space. And the active bystander part really comes in at the end, because we also need to feel that when we're in a space, people would stand up for us, even if it doesn't impact them. If it's not their identifier that's being challenged, it's, will my peers speak up for me? Will I be supported by those around me? And we've got some nice examples here of kind of EDI in practice, right? We've got these headlines, and what really matters here to me is its representation. This is showing the importance of anybody and everybody having space in sport, because you can't be what you can't see. And I think this, I want to say, was it yesterday, the day before, was it the first badminton athlete, I think the female there's like a first time in a badminton winner Paralympics from this certain part of this community, and they were talking about how I'm the first, but I really can't be the last. And it's really important that what we show is that this just needs to be normal, that we have better inclusion. If we see the volleyball images here, I think Sukhdev, it was us that were talking about this, is people get to engage in a way that's comfortable for them.
Yeah.
Does it matter what they're wearing? What matters is, are they comfortable? Does it impact their sport to have to wear something different, or do they get to be a part of this sport and play in a way that suits them? I think it's really, really important. We can see here in the top right-hand corner, we've got Ali Ahandi. He is the first Iraqi player to play in the Premier League. That demonstrates to so many people the space that they have to be in that sport as well. We need to show greater inclusion in our visuals. We need to make sure we do promote the fact that it's normal to have diversity in sport. It shouldn't be novel, but we do need to show the first. We does need to be of that language. It can't be the last. Okay, what are we going to do to make sure this is supported? What are we going to keep to make sure this legacy keeps going? But even at Active Suffolk, we have fit villages, because if you're, say, in your over 50s category now, and maybe you're not confident in sport, where do you get to go to still enhance your strength, to build your community through that physical activity in a way that feels safe for you? And actually, sometimes a lot of people of that sort of age category say, I feel intimidated in certain spaces, or I don't want to go and start a brand new club, or I really want to go to the gym, but I don't know exactly what to do in that space. And we need to make sure we're not just investing in people that are going to give really great outputs at an elite level. It needs to be that every single person in society has access to greater sport and physical activity participation. And I think one of the things we look at is often feel like we have to do it by ourselves. But actually, there are so many organisations that can show us how to do this. So we have lots of organisations of UK Sport, UK Coaching have loads of information. Even things like the Anti-Bullying Alliance, they have so much information about having safer spaces, and actually free training on things like anti-bullying relates really closely to inclusion, because actually it's looking at those wider translatable principles again. And if we think of Activity Alliance, whilst they're focused on disability inclusion and participation in sport, some of their 10 top tips include things like lean into my values, reassure me, include me, welcome me, show me. They're completely translatable to any sport and any environment, because it's about that human experience. And I really like this together we can change it narrative, because actually it's all of our responsibility. It's not just the club welfare officers, it's not just the coaches, it's any single person that cares about sport and physical activity should be investing in this space and making sure that people feel really seen. And I just wanted to talk about support systems, because sometimes it does feel overwhelming. If you're an affiliated sport and you have a national governing body, you can get support from them. But it's also about talking to your members. Learn from lived experience, seek that information, ask what people around you need, what their experiences or barriers have been in sport. But also you can learn from experts. There's so many podcasts now. There are different methods of learning for different people. There's training, there's podcasts, there's lots of documentaries about different inclusion in sport. But it's also remembering that we actually, as a network of sport welfare officers, can really help with this as well, because we're looking to host webinars, forums, we're looking at having experts come along to these. So if there's certain things you want and need, we can actually help signpost you to resources and actually have these conversations. And if it's not available now, then it's something maybe we can start to ask for. We can start to look at how do we fill that gap? How do we make sure there is information out there? And UK Coaching, for example, have lots of licensed tutors, and we work quite closely with them to think about what training needs do clubs have. So if you do have training needs or you're curious, then please do reach out. But don't forget that your policies and codes of conduct are that starting piece for the tone that you set when people join your club, and they also help you to challenge that behaviour if people are acting out of alignment with that. So what I'm going to now leave you with is a question of, based on today, what can you now do? What's one thing you can think, change, do in relation to having more inclusive practice? And it's a semi-rhetorical question. We will go to a question and answer space in a moment, but I think it's something that we need to remember is every little step is a domino for positive change. So It doesn't matter if you can't change it all. It's what can I do right now? And we've got a feedback form here on this QR code. If you do have any feedback or thoughts or even needs after today's session, please do reach out. Let us know. We want to make sure that all these sessions benefit We want to rerun them. We're going to make sure that we have this conversation keep going throughout the year, but we are going to have Active Bystander Week every year now, hopefully. So let us know your thoughts. What's gone well? What else would you like to see? And thank you so much for engaging with today.